Righto. Now we're recording. So you have various kinds of records for various ancient civilizations. Of course, we saw with the Egyptians, because of their funerary habits, we have a great deal of information that they left. Similarly, with the Greeks, there was a very, very large market for Greek ceramics from very early on, and different Greek cities were distinguished by their ceramic styles, but these were traded and sold far and wide. In fact, in the ancient civilizations before Rome, we find in the Etruscan civilization, I'm sorry, we find some of these beautiful Greek ceramic pieces that had been imported into that area because they were very highly prized objects. And it's also had to do with some funerary customs, as we will see. So, a great pleasure for me in finding out about this. And we're going to see a bunch of different reasons why this is an important topic. But the topic we're going to talk about today is black. There it is. Na, 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 Greek ceramics. Greek ceramics. Coming up. There it is. So, the topic of Greek ceramics are important for a number of different reasons. It's kind of surprising, but we do get an awful lot of information, including about Greek mythology, from Greek ceramics. They're a huge source of information, as a matter of fact. And they reflect and map on very, very well with what we see in the literature of the times, for example, in the drama, and as I say, in the mythology. So it's a part of the old archaeological record. This is a fairly big PowerPoint, and I will also just post the PowerPoint by itself on the Moodle so you can look at it at your leisure. There is Corpus Vasorum Antiquorum, has over 100,000 pieces. Of course, a shard is a piece of ancient ceramics. A fragment is a piece of prose or a quotation that we can textually collate into more than one written source. So we've really this incredible ceramic record, and we use it for all kinds of different reasons. I'll show you the way some anthropologists use the ceramics as we go on. And in addition to that, what I like about them, and one of the reasons I always try to make sure to show them to people, is they're very beautiful things. So there's really only two big pieces of vocabulary as far as that's concerned that we need here. The amphora, you've all seen amphoras a million times. They're just common, sort of the Greek equivalent of a bottle. They were used to have wine, oil. They have long necks so that things don't spill, particularly on sea voyages. Of course, when a boat sank, there would be many of these on board. So we have many, many, many of these amphorae. And the crater, people would be having a drinking party or a dinner party, and what you would have is a large vessel of water, perhaps, or perhaps a very strong wine, one or the other, in the middle. And what the guests would do is to mix the wine with water until it was as strong or as weak as they wanted it. Very civilized, really. And so the crater would be in the middle of the room, and as I mentioned, the amphora is more like a bottle, and it was very, very common, used particularly for oil, wine, and other kinds of precious fluids. So they were both fairly common household objects. However, it also became the practice, because you give a libation to the gods when you're sort of blessing someone, and that's why you say skol, or here's a toast and everything. You're giving a little bit of a libation. That is, you're giving the god a little sip of what you're having. So the amphora were put in front of women's tombs, and the craters were put in front of men's tombs to receive these offerings, these libations. So, all right, and that's really all we need to know about that. We're not going to get into the minutiae of these guys. There we go. So here's your basic amphorae. There are millions of these all over the place, as we'll see. They get to be also very decorated. The ones we're going to look at, of course, are precious decorated objects. And here's a crater. Look at this one. This is actually from Mycenae, the civilization that collapsed at the time of the Bronze Age collapse. So we see this ceramic tradition was an old tradition that went back into the second millennium. And so what we're going to look at today is the gradual coming back in the same way as when we look at Homer and Hesiod, we're looking at the gradual coming back of the spoken culture of Greece. So that, again, very early, right around the turn of the millennium, and I'm going to get to the pictures of this stuff soon, don't worry. We get the proto-geometrical period. What are these names meaning? These names are about the way that these objects are decorated. Proto-geometrical, that is repeating patterns, fairly simple, although we do see a fairly high level of artistry in these objects, in the execution of these objects, although the designs are simple. It's really quite amazing. The designs start off as these simple geometrical shapes and repeated patterns, and gradually we get an incredible medium in which to do art. So here's a proto-geometric amphora. Now again, notice it's a stylized amphora. It's got a big, wide neck and so on. Look also at the craft. The glazing is quite amazing. These glazes last after thousands and thousands of years. These finishes are not all literally glazes. And of course, there's a huge area of scholarship in that. But look at how nice this object is. Very old. And here's another, that's black lacquer there. Proto-geometrical, so simple shapes. And this would be somewhere getting up towards 3,000 years ago, about maybe 2,600, 2,700, or 800 years ago. These are large crater, and that might be, again, a funerary object. And this we'll see later on. We'll come back to this. You get to see these animals on the neck there. And that's another black lacquered object. So let's see. So then you get the 9th and 8th centuries. Again, the 8th century is the century of our epic poets, Homer and Hesiod. And at this time, you start to get the geometrical, a more advanced design. And we start to find the first people who we notice as distinct designs and distinct creators, and characterize the black Dipylon style, characterized by extensive use of black varnish. That's one of those. That's a Dipylon style black varnished object. And then in the middle geometrical, in the years, the decades after Homer, we get the appearance of these animals, as you see here, animals on the neck there, which alternate with the geometrical bands. And around 750, the human figures. And the Dipylon master will be the first of a number of actual artists who we know and can identify. And later on, they sign their names, so we know their names. Very similar to the literature that we've been looking at. What they typically decorated these objects with were pictures of mythology, and notably incidents from the Trojan War, the Iliad and the Odyssey, the writings of Homer. So here's another early geometrical period. And as I say, all of these objects, you'll see that the artistry is really quite good, even when the patterns are very simple. And there you get that geometrical period, and you're starting to get something that's more complex. Look at the hand. And then finally, this appearance of animal figures, which is also characters. You call them also cartoons. Ceramic figures of animal figures, also common in pre-Columbian civilizations in the New World. We have a lot of this kind of ceramics in the shape of all sorts of animals and other things. And so there you see, very representative and typical object from this period. So then moving on a little bit, the Dipylon master, the Dipylon cemetery, and he and his workshop were the shop that were making these funerary objects, the amphorae and the craters, to put in front of the tombs of people, well-to-do people who had nice tombs in the Dipylon cemetery in Athens. The necropolis, the Acropolis, the sky city, the necropolis, the underworld city, and they called their cemetery the necropolis and the surrounding area. Okay, And that last bullet point there, yeah, we have maybe 50 objects from the Dipulon Master. Again, we have thousands of these objects. A prothesis is going to be a funeral procession. Again, these were made on the occasion, often, of someone's death. And so often you will have a representation of a funeral march. Here you see, again, a detail of that. Notice the way the warriors are depicted with these triangular torsos. And again, very, very intricately detailed. In ekphora, that is the bringing of the body to the tomb. Very grand. There's a detail of that. Now, and just to give you some idea of the size, I mean, personally, I wouldn't have like maybe all the college students just sort of walking around it with no like case or line or anything, but maybe that's just me. There's a detail again. You can see these are all about these big funeral processions. You have an object for a very high status person. And those are the warriors, those strange little double breastplates on their chariots. The Orientalizing period, now not coincidentally, what you have is these are people who are living there in the Aegean Sea at the end of the Silk Road, and all sorts of influences from as far away as China and certainly from India and Egypt and other places are coming in. So we see Orientalizing as it sounds. We see influences coming in from the Near East, notably from the Persians. The Persians would be the people with the big cultural soft power in the Greek islands at this time, in the middle of the first millennium. All kinds of different animals and all kinds of different griffins and other kinds of humeric animals that were characteristic we saw of other areas in the Middle East. And lots of plastic pottery that's in the shape of animals. And then we'll talk a little bit about that wild goats style, which is interesting. The Analatus painter, maybe that's the oldest painted inscription in Greek. They start to sign their names. Later on, they start to also put little name labels on pictures on things. So this is enormously valuable, of course, for us. There's the picture of Analatos' signature on his piece of pottery. Very early on, we're still 200 years before the imperial age of Athens here. These get to be very, very large objects. They're telling a lot of stories. This kind of pointillist style that they have. There you see the griffins, strange animals, and still a procession of charioteers on the top. The Polyphemus painter. So now we're coming into the middle of the 7th century. Lots of Homeric themes, lots of stories from the Homeric epics, which were clearly hugely influential because these people often are rummaging through the epics and really following them very closely. And at this point, you also get a distinction. We can see the distinction between the potter and the painter. Some artists both threw the pots and painted them, but painting became a high status profession of its own after a while. Now, that last bullet point there, the blinding of Polyphemus, the Cyclops, again from Odysseus, and then Perseus and the Gorgons. Okay, it's big. And they got a chain around it, good. And there is Odysseus blinding the Cyclops. I think we saw another depiction of that, talking about Homer. Demon. Very nice Corinthian. These sort of naturalistic Corinthian pieces with all the animals on them are very nice. Corinth was always known for kind of sumptuous taste. Very typical. And this plastic vase, as I say, if you ever go to the Andes mountain countries, don't miss looking at their plastic ceramics from the pre-Inca, the Nazca, and Chimor cultures. Look at the detail on that. And again, typically Corinthian. So the wild goat style. Now, the reason I want to talk about the wild goat style, let me just step out of here for a second while we talk about the wild goat style. In the wild goat style itself, that you had these rustic sort of patterns that would be repeated. The culture a lot more a popular culture than people think. I mean, I think I mentioned iconic figures before. Very much a widespread sort of culture, and so the reason why these island simple ceramic designs are important, though, is that around this time, as the Greek civilization came back, Greece also started seeding colonies throughout this end of the Mediterranean and across the Mediterranean out to the Italian Peninsula and North Africa. And one thing that's interesting to scholars is the spread of Greek colonization, and which Greeks from which city-states in the original Greek homelands set up which colonies and what happened next and so on. It's an important part of the narrative. And one of the most reliable and accurate ways of tracing this and understanding where and why these different city-states seeded colonies around the area is the pottery. We can see that it's the same pottery in this place and that place, and they got the pottery from the same place. And we can look at these styles of pottery and know what the styles of pottery are identified with. This is a really typical method. What you do is you cross-reference various things, such as the ceramics and other things. For example, in studying Neolithic Europe, jewelry is very important. Different styles of jewelry can be identified with different lineages of people that are being studied. So you can trace the lineages where the descendants of one group went or another group went if you have a good enough grasp of differences between different styles of the crafts, the objects that they make. And so these ceramic objects are very important for telling that kind of story. So that in mind, the wild goat story style. And yeah, that's what I was saying in that last bullet point there, founding and dating these Greek colonies. Of course, you also can know when a style became popular, and then you can tell when different people arrived in different places, that kind of thing. Okay. And there's a wild goat style. Notice something also here. They don't like to have empty spaces. So they're filling in all the spaces with all kinds of symbols. We saw that was also true on the cylinder seals. Okay, then we get two. So you have the very earliest proto-geometric, then geometric, orientalizing. And then you get black figure and red figure, which refer quite literally to the colors of the main characters on the objects. And this has to do with the technology that they're using to make these objects. Now we really get into, now you will recognize these objects as ones that you've seen before and that I've been using a lot in setting up some of these other videos. Again, very popular, each city with its own style. You have a couple of technological innovations here. You're starting to get the artists are incising contours into the paint, lines into the paint. And we have quite a number of identifiable artists. These were very popular and sold far and wide. We find these objects far away in even other cultures, such as the Etruscan culture, and of course, far away in North Africa. A Corinthian kiln firing to make the ceramics around the middle of the century of pre-Socratic Heraclitus. Sophilos, who shows mythological scenes. Notice that second bullet point there, the funeral games for Patroclus. Patroclus was Achilles' best friend, and Achilles wouldn't fight because he was mad at Agamemnon. So Patroclus dressed up in Achilles' armor to see if he could scare everybody and ended up getting himself killed. So that's a scene that we see here, the Francois vase, one of the oldest, signed by Clytius, with over 200 figures. and then unfortunately, it looks like a guard smashed it into 638 pieces. And they restored it, and then restored it again in '73 with some previously missing pieces. I guess they must have like moved a bookshelf or something and found some other chunks of it back there. So there he is. Sophilos drew me. They start leaving these kind of graffiti tags on their objects. But look at the quality of that object. And the Francois vase, which has over 200 characters on it. The front and the back. The backs are interesting sometimes, kind of the B side, because if you were putting a object in front of a tomb, then nobody was going to look at the back side, but they had to have something on it. So some of those are interesting. And here you see he's putting a lot of tags. He's writing a lot of things and putting names on everybody and everything. And this is from that website I steered you to, where they really have all of them in these black and white pictures. I like the artistry in this one. You can see all the crew members in Theseus's ship are also happy. Theseus's ship, of course, the ship where the carpenter slowly replaces it piece by piece every time a piece of the wood wears out, until when it comes back to the port, there aren't any of the original physical pieces, indicating that the identity of the ship doesn't depend on the stuff that it's made of, unless it does, and the carpenter has all the old pieces of wood and built the old ship in his backyard. Philosophical question, Theseus's ship. Yeah, we just went through a bunch. Here we go. Peleus and Thetis. Nice shields. Lots of battle stories. There you have Corinthian again. Achilles dragging Hector. We talked about that, I think, when we were doing Homer. Armed Athena. Pallas Athena. Athena warrior. Often with these heroic military stories. This is a charming one. Bird catching. You put nets up in the trees and catch the birds, and they would eat these little songbirds. It's bad for the environment, but it's a beautiful plate. Heracles fighting the Hydra. Ezekias, the finest master known of the black figure style, who also made very nice paintings, made very nice pieces. There's his signature. Achilles and Ajax at the siege of Troy in the Trojan War. This made around the middle of the 6th century, about 200 years after Homer. This is a nice piece, Dionysus and the sailors. The sailors found Dionysus in the form of a beautiful boy, so they carried him off. And when he woke up, he turned the ship into grapevines, and lions and panthers scared the sailors, and the sailors are dolphins. The dolphins are sailors who tried to kidnap Dionysus. And there's the Dionysus cup, and you see the mast is turned into a wine vine, and all the dolphins are swimming around. Black figure. Very strange. Looks almost like 1920s kind of a thing. Okay. And then finally, the red figure style will be the last style that we looked at. 520, and then that'll get you through the 4th and the 3rd century. And so very popular. We have over 40,000 of them. So let's take a look at some of those. Now you start to sort of recognize these objects. Look at the finish on that thing. Oedipus and the Sphinx at the gate of Thebes asking the riddle. What has 4 legs? What walks on 4 legs at dawn, 2 legs at noon, and 3 legs at dusk? And they also, because many people wanted these objects, after a while they sort of became part of bourgeois life. And so also then you start to get depictions of domestic life with lots of domestic objects and other things that are also of tremendous interest, as well as eros. Both the Greeks and the Romans don't mind a little household eros. It's a little jolting with the Romans, since they think that, their main fertility symbol is the phallus, so that takes a little getting used to. Euphronius. Another one, we're going to look at the Sarpedon crater, the Euphronius crater. Okay, so we're going to look at a helicrater now, the Sarpedon crater. It shows a Trojan War scene from the front, and then it shows a contemporary scene of some Athenian youths on the back. The idea is sort of that the Athenian youths are related to the great warriors on the front. And as I say, this doesn't say much, but I will post this PowerPoint separately on the Moodle, so you can look at that if you want to. But I'll put links up. You shouldn't worry about that too much. And they dated it pretty accurately because somebody wrote Leagros is handsome on it. And Leagros there was kind of a half joking popular cultural meme at the time about Leagros, the handsomest man in Greece, whoever he was. All we know about him is he was this man who everyone thought was the handsomest man around that time. So we can date it very accurately to the end of the 6th century. There again, the death of Patroclus. And there's a crater, not that big. Another detail, there he is. That's Hermes, the messenger of Zeus, who brings news. He's the one standing with his crook. And then that's Thanatos, I think, the death god who's carrying him off. And on the back of it, you have these youths. Again, I like his crab shield. If you unfold that, this is what it would look like. And again, on the sides of it, above the handles, you have to have some kind of decoration. You can't just have empty space. Another example, right around 500, right around the time of the Persian Wars. Another one, people just sort of messing around. So anyway, just to finish this up then, you start at the beginning of the millennium, you have just proto-geometrical. I mean, the amazing thing about it is that it tracks so closely and just is, in fact, part of our evidence for and part of our narrative of this gradual revival or renacimiento of Greek culture across these centuries of the first half of the first millennium, the second quarter of the first millennium. All right, so I'll give you some links to look up more about that if you're interested in that. That's a good topic, as is statuary, Greek statuary. Where we're going to go after this is into Greek drama. We're going to get back to some literary pursuits. All righty, so I'll end with that. Bye-bye.